Okay, we'll get started here. Thank you so much for joining. Hello and welcome. My name is Catherine Squires-Basson. I'm the Director of Culture and Community here at Proline. And first of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy lives and schedules to join us. We really do appreciate your participation and the fact that you're interested enough in this topic to come and join us. This session is part of our Proline Academy series, through which we offer learning to Strata Council members and also to the broader public on topics related to owning, living in, and taking care of your Strata communities. If you have any feedback today about today's session, or if you have any suggestions for future sessions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I am the person that you received the invitations from, so you can just shoot an email right back to that. Today, we're going to be talking about the Strata Council Manual and how it can help you in your role on council. I will now turn it over to Christy Tamburi and Sherry Olson, both of whom are experienced Strata property managers here at Proline, to lead you through the rest of the session.
Thank you, Catherine, and we're very happy to be here. And Catherine is a whiz with all of these slides that you're going to see as we go through. So we really appreciate everything that she does on the creative side of things, putting together these beautiful presentations that we get to talk about with you. To the purpose of the session today is to provide everyone with information on the Strata Council Manual. The Strata Council Manual may be new to some of you, and some of you may have seen it before. We've recently updated it to give it a longer shelf life. And if you do have a manual that you have been given previously from one of your other managers, we strongly encourage you to get our new updated version. We're going to go over the purpose of the manual. It has 15 chapters, so it's quite dense. So we're not going to be able to go over everything that's in it. But hopefully today we'll be able to give you a really good idea of how you can best use this wonderful, amazing document that Proline has put together. We're going to go over a few of the chapters: relationships, council meetings, general meetings, the operating statements, emergencies, and insurance. And one of the things that we do want to know is, have you ever accessed the Strata Council Manual? So we're going to launch a poll, which you should see on your screen now. And we're going to just take a minute to have you answer those questions to give us a better idea of how many of you are familiar with this amazing document. Once everyone has made their preferences, their selections there, Catherine's going to close the poll and we'll move forward with the presentation. Hopefully everyone remembers to hit the submit button after they've made their selections. Some of you that have attended AGMs via Zoom may be already familiar with the poll system. It's also a great way to ask questions during an AGM or an information meeting. Okay, great. So we can see that we've got a lot of people who have never seen or accessed the Strata Council Manual before. Well, great, then you are in the right place. And for those of you that have, you've heard about it through either a property manager, another Proline person, another council member, and the majority of you have heard about it through the invitation to this session, which means that this session generated you going and seeking knowledge about the council manual. And then a small percentage have seen it on the website, which is great because that is the best place to look for it. So that brings us to the Strata website. Many of you may or may not be registered for your Strata website. If you are not, then I strongly recommend as a council member that you get yourself registered, and you can do that by going to the Proline website, selecting login and following the prompts to get yourself registered for your Strata website. Once you're registered, you will go onto the website and see a folder called Council Only. There on the screen, you can see that Catherine has very kindly circled it in red. Sometimes you'll see it in capital letters so that you can automatically jump into that folder. And within that folder, there is going to be an abundance of documents, one of which will be the Strata Council Manual. And you can, from there, download it to your computer and use it as a reference. And I don't know how many of you have set up a folder for yourself. Being on council, you may want to create a folder on your computer for all of your Strata related documents, and the Strata Council Manual will be one of your primary tools to help guide you. And you may be the person on council that is going to be, taking the lead on directing all of your other council members to, hey, we don't have an answer to this. Let's check our council manual. It may become your new best friend in dealing with council related issues. You'll see here on the slide the overview and how do you use your manual and what you will find in the manual. So some of that we're going to hit on today. Obviously, we're not going to go through each of the 15 chapters, but we're going to hit some of the highlights to better enable you to make use of the document. It's like, for those of you that might have a depreciation report, it's only as good as the people that use it. You can get a report and throw it in a drawer and never look at it, or you can have this document and make notes on it or reference it and use it to guide you through all things Strata related while you're sitting as a council member. Okay, so one of the first things we talk about are the relationships that you encounter as a council member. We're going to launch a poll really quickly here to go over briefly whether or not you are aware of a position called a community ambassador. So we've got a short question for you on the screen. And this will really give us a good idea of how many people are aware of the community ambassador position, which I personally think is an excellent position for Stratas to have, to bring everyone together in a really good, friendly, community spirited way. Oh, look at how many people missed the last session, the last webinar on community ambassadors. It was such a good session too, way more fun than anything you would have known. So community ambassador, and most of you don't have a community ambassador for your Strata. Great, well, that's super information. Just a brief idea of what a community ambassador is. It is a person who is part of your Strata, does not have to be a council member, but somebody who is very welcoming, very interested in how your Strata works on a day-to-day basis. They know where the garbage is. They know where the recycle goes. They're interested in pulling people together in a social way. So maybe they organize a garage sale or a barbecue or the coffee or a wine and cheese. The community ambassador can be a delegate of your Strata Council and can work with council to welcome new owners and really help create a feeling of community within your Strata. The Strata Corporation is part of the governance of your Strata, and the owners, the tenants, people that live there, residents, Strata Council, property managers are all part of that community. And we work together to ensure that the Strata Council can continue with their role in a seamless, smooth fashion and make sure that they can uphold all of their responsibilities and obligations. Oftentimes your strata manager isn't available. Maybe a senior council member who has experience isn't available. So the Strata Council Manual is a great tool to help you when you have questions and you don't know who to turn to. Okay, Strata Council meetings. So many councils meet monthly. You might be on a council that only meets every second month. One of the things that you will find is your agency agreement will show you how many times you are to meet with your strata manager each month. The council manual will also help you understand the general conduct of the people in the council meeting. It will talk about how long the meetings are supposed to be. It will direct you to the agency agreement, which is your agreement with Proline Management, that shows you what the people that first decided to sign on with Proline agreed upon. And those things can be changed from time to time with amendments to your agreement, and that can be discussed with your manager. It will show you how to deal with correspondence. So oftentimes council receives correspondence from owners, requests, complaints, alteration approval requirements. All of that is outlined in the council manual. And Strata Council meetings are a perfect opportunity to recruit new owners. So how many of you know if owners can attend meetings, or how many of you have owners that attend council meetings as observers? The poll is launched. Thank you, Catherine. These are some of the questions that might come up when you're a new Strata Council member. When you refer to the Strata Council Manual, it'll help you as a council member figure some of the things out that you may not know as a new council member, or maybe you've been on council for a long time and you've just never known the answer to that. I like the last question there. What? You can have owners attend? Yes, you can. Owners can attend as observers, and there are some stratas that may even provide for an opportunity either at the beginning or the end of the meeting for council to listen to their owners and either hear questions or recommendations or even just comments. And some council meetings never have an owner attend. Council meetings are an excellent opportunity to invite someone from your strata to join as an observer to get an idea of what a council meeting looks like. What does the council do? What do they talk about? Is there a position for me in that? You don't have to have a PhD to be a council member. Everyone has a skill that they can contribute. We want to encourage all owners to take the time, take the opportunity to attend a council meeting. And that starts with the Strata Council inviting people. It's a really good opportunity to say, hey, you don't know what it's like being on council, come and sit and listen in on a meeting. The Strata Council Manual will provide you with how you can talk to other owners about what a council does and sort of take the fear away from sitting on council. Okay, general meetings. So one of the other topics that is presented in the manual are the general meetings. Everyone is familiar with annual general meetings. Some of you may also know that councils can call special general meetings throughout the year in addition to an annual general meeting. And the general meeting agenda is dictated by your bylaws. So when you see that agenda on the first page of the notice, we take that right from your bylaws, and then the council can add items to the notice. So for example, at an annual general meeting, We know that the purpose of that meeting is mainly to approve the budget for the fiscal year and elect the Strata Council. However, the Strata Council does have the ability to add new business, and under new business, they may choose to add resolutions to approve expenditures that happen or will need to happen throughout the year. You may look at your depreciation report and see what is required in the coming year, what the amount of funds might be, and how to present that resolution for approval at the AGM. There is extensive content in the manual that shows you the notice time, the procedure, the outline of the general meetings, and the type of voting. Most voting is by majority vote. So for example, the approval of the agenda, the approval of the minutes are majority vote, and then the approval of the budget, which is also majority vote, but could be amended at the meeting. And other resolutions are either by majority vote or by a 3/4 vote. And of course, bylaw resolutions, amendments to your bylaws, are a 3/4 vote of the owners in attendance at the meetings. All of this is outlined in the council manual, and the council can get together. It's a really great idea when you have a new council just elected after your AGM to sit down and review the council manual together. And then you can come up with any questions that you have, anything that you want to directly ask your strata manager, and you can get more information as you go along and become really a useful part of the council when you understand what your role is on council. All righty. And one of the other things that the manual has is the financials. And I'm going to pass it over to Christy to go through the financial components.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sherry. So we are going to do a bit of a dive into the financial components of the Strata Council Manual. But first, we're going to launch a little quiz. So the question is, which questions can you find answered in the operating statements section of the manual? So we'll give people a minute or two to respond. Okay, there we go. So the vast majority of people here present answered correctly, all of the above. So the council manual provides you with an overview of what we Proline give to strata corporations. There's a section on the operating account statement, collections procedures, and banking. So we're going to, from there, go a little bit deeper into each of those sections. And so first, we are going to look at what Proline provides in terms of financial operating statements. And so the manual gives a very detailed summary around the financial services that Proline provides to strata corporations. And we're ultimately going to go through a number of slides following this one that kind of looks at a sample operating statement so that we can really understand what each component of that statement means and what information is contained in those sections. So when you're reviewing your operating statements, one of the important things to note is ultimately that the reconciled copy of your bank statement for each account, so for your operating account, for your contingency reserve account, and if you have a special levy account, the special levy account, the bank statement included for every month is actually the previous month, and that's just to allow time to ensure that you get that reconciled copy. So the first section we're going to look at is the operating account statement. And so what you see on your screen here is the income section of the operating statement. And first, I just want to point out that every page, every statement page within Proline's operating statements has 5 specific columns. And so what we're looking at is the current actuals. And so that's the current, in this case, income received within any given month. The next column is the year-to-date actual, and so that is the income received to date within that fiscal year. The annual budget is the annual budget that the owners have approved at the last annual general meeting. We also include a column for the last year's year-to-date for that same period, so that you can, as a council member, you can easily look at your statement to compare where you're at, in this case for income now versus the same period in the previous year. And then lastly, the furthest column on the right-hand side is the percentage of budget used. This breaks down by percentage, so you have a good sense of exactly where you're at within your fiscal year in terms of budget. And so looking at this particular sample operating statement, you'll see that there are a number of different categories for income. Every strata corporation may look a little bit different, but ultimately we're going to see the strata assessments collected, so that, and then that will be broken down for the operating versus the contingency reserve fund contribution. And then depending on what other income your particular strata corporation collects, you'll also see that broken down. So for this example, we've broken down move-in fees, car wash revenue, guest suite, interest income, other income, which typically for most strata corporations includes income related to bylaw fines and income related to the purchase of replacement keys and or fobs, garage remotes, that type of thing. So that is the income portion of the operating statement. The next section on your operating statement, still looking at the operating account statement, is the operating expenses for building common areas. And it's important to note that the operating account is intended to allow for expenses that occur at least once per year. So this is your checking account. This is where you're taking care of the routine maintenance that you get done on an annual basis. So again, because this is a sample, you'll see quite a number of line items here, from hydro and other utilities to different kinds of maintenance like dryer vent cleaning and window cleaning, gutter cleaning, to insurance, caretaking services if you've got a caretaker. Basically, each strata corporation's operating statement under the building common areas is going to be specific to the actual budget and the actual expenses of your strata corporation. And so having a good idea of what those expenses are will help to understand and help to allow you to read the operating statement. And this is a great section of the Strata Council Manual, and is definitely worth a dive if you're new to a Strata Council and taking on the role of the treasurer, for example. One thing I do want to mention is that there is often 2 schools of thought with building common area line items. So one school of thought is having many line items that outline specific budgets for specific jobs. So for example, as I mentioned, you may have a dryer vent cleaning line, you may have a window cleaning line, you may have a carpet cleaning line, and then you may also have a building maintenance general line. And the benefit to having multiple lines for multiple projects is that it provides greater transparency to owners when they get the operating statements, because they can see exactly what expenses pertain to what projects. It also has the added benefit of providing future council members the ability to easily look back at previous years to see what the actual costs were for those particular projects without having to go into the nitty-gritty disbursement details. Having said that, the alternative school of thought is eliminating some of those line items like carpet cleaning or window cleaning or gutter cleaning and amalgamating all of the maintenance related projects and work into one catch-all under building maintenance general. And the benefit there is that if you're grouping those projects together, you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of the actual funding. But having said that, it doesn't allow for that clear transparency for owners. Now, I do want to touch on the fact that we at Proline have a charter of accounts. So our system is somewhat limited in terms of the actual names of the line items. So if you're looking to potentially add a line item to your budget, I would encourage you to speak to your Strata property manager to chat with what line items we can add and what that might look like. And that detail is also covered in the Strata Council Manual. So if you want to take a peek there, that's always a handy resource. The next section, which again is contained within the manual, is an overview of the operating account statement administrative costs. And so this is broken out specifically outside of the building common areas costs. Typically, we see the property management fees budgeted out of this area, admin and postage. So that's your costs for printing, scanning, duplication, sending mail out. There may be some office supplies depending on the structure of your strata corporation. And then we have interest bank charges. And so that's the $25 fee for the BMO account. Some strata corporations also have dues and fees, which typically we see CHOA or VISOA membership fees paid out of. And then you have the option of a miscellaneous line to put just that, miscellaneous things. Sometimes strata corporations will allocate annual general meeting venue costs into that line. But what's missing here that we often see in this area is a line for professional fees. And so that could go towards legal costs, that could go towards engaging an engineer for a particular project. But typically we would see professional fees under the administrative section of the operating statement as well. Next is the other expenses portion of your operating statement. And so this is where you'll see the transfer to the reserve. So whatever you've budgeted for the year to contribute to your contingency reserve fund. It may also have a line for transfers from the reserve. And so this is typically, and we see this more and more as insurance premiums rise, but you may be in a position where you have to take a loan from your contingency reserve fund to supplement the cash flow in your operating account. So this is where you would see that loan. In addition, there is the option for a special projects line. So not all strata corporations use this line, but it is an option if you want to plan a specific special project to be funded from the operating account, and it would appear under this section of the statement. Okay, and then at the very end of the operating account statement, we summarize everything. And so the summary shows the total income in, total expenses out, what the overall cash flow was for that period, the add balance forward bank is specifically the opening balance. And then of course we give you your closing balance at the end of whatever the period is. So again, all of these summaries are included in the Strata Council Manual. It's a great resource if you're looking through your operating statement and you come across something that is confusing or you're unsure about. It's a fantastic tool to open up and dive a little deeper. So we've talked about the operating account. The next is your contingency reserve fund and its statement. So it does look similar to the operating fund statement, but it is a little bit different. And of course, the purpose of the contingency reserve fund is to pay for projects and work that occur less than once per year. So typically we're looking at larger capital replacement projects, recommendations within your depreciation report, and those projects that you may not necessarily see coming. So there is an element and an allowance in the Strata Property Act to allow for some emergency costs out of the contingency reserve fund. Looking at this particular statement, you'll see that the columns are a little bit different on this page. We show a separate account number, and when a new contingency reserve fund project is approved, it gets a specific account number that is designated just for that project. And for example, with this summary state or this example statement, roof repairs, for example, are assigned 8905. So that's a little bit different from the operating statement in that those charter of accounts and those codes are specific to those line items in the operating fund. We also have a column for the current actuals. So that's the actual amount that we have received in income and what we've put out in terms of expenses, the year to date, the annual budget for the contingency reserve fund, and then the budget used. So the column missing is the previous year's year to date, and we don't compare those because often it's just simply not comparable because you're working with very different projects out of the contingency reserve fund. So the statement here breaks down contributions. So that's all of your income in, and it will look a little bit different from strata to strata depending on where your income is coming from. So for example, if you've got surplus cash coming from the operating into the contingency reserve fund, then we would show that there. There may be rental suite revenue. It's also where the interest collected is reflected for the contingency reserve fund. And if you're diving into your own operating statements, you'll notice, and I think we all know that interest rates have risen. The benefit to strata corporations is that we're collecting more interest income and have over the course of the last few months, and it's building up those contingency reserve fund balances quicker. So that's fantastic. The next section is expenses. And so again, those are the projects that you have approved at your general meetings with the exception of emergencies. And so you'll see for this particular sample, there are 2 emergency expenditures. One specifically, it was for a hot water tank replacement, and then another for storm cleanup. And so if you do have emergencies arise, please do ensure to speak with your Strata Council manager to discuss limitations of the Strata Property Act and restrictions on how to spend funds that are not approved by the owners. Important to note the interfund transfers in and out. So this is specifically where we show any loans to the operating account, and then we account for that loan to be repaid because loans do have to be repaid within the fiscal year that it is borrowed. In addition, if you've got a special levy with funds going to or from the special levy from the contingency, this is the section that you would see it there. And then lastly, of course, there is a summary that shows total contributions, total expenses, those potential interfund transfers, it shows the increase or decrease based on the period, what the opening balance was, and what the closing balance is. It's important to note that some strata corporations choose to invest some of their contingency reserve fund monies. And so if your strata corporation has chosen to invest funds, you'll also see at the bottom of this statement an explanation of a portion of monies held in the BMO bank account in cash, and then what the investments are. And that leads me to our next slide. If you do have investments within your strata corporation, you'll have a separate page within your monthly operating statement that provides all of the details on those investments. So for this particular sample, we're looking at the institution that the investments are held, the type of investment, the yield, maturity date, term, and then the actual amount, the original amount that was invested. So it's important, obviously, to keep an eye on those maturity dates so that as a strata council, you can have a discussion in advance to determine how best to handle those monies, whether or not you're going to pop that money back into the contingency reserve fund or choose to reinvest in another investment. Okay. On to the next is the disbursement report. And so within every operating statement, you as a council member will receive a disbursement report. The disbursement report is a breakdown of all of the costs paid, and it's organized by those individual line items. It is important to note that the council only folder on the website is where these full operating statements live. So we post the full operating statements for councils in the council only folder by the 10th of every month. So when you're ready to approve your operating statement, for example, for April, you would pop into the council only folder typically no earlier than the 9th of the next month, which would of course be May, and you can download that operating statement. The operating statements that we provide to owners do not include the disbursement report details. I also want to touch on just very briefly check runs, because of course Proline's check runs ultimately pay for the costs that are reported within the disbursement report. So we have 3 check runs every single month, one typically around the 2nd business day, one usually around the 13th or 14th of the month. And then we have the last check run usually around the 22nd of the month. Of course, it depends on where those days fall into the calendar. So when we receive invoices, if it's received 2 days prior to a check, 2 business days prior to a check run date, then it'll make it into that check run. Otherwise, it'll hit the next one. I also want to mention very briefly that the agency agreement between Proline Management and the Strata Corporation authorizes Proline to pay invoices on behalf of Strata. So that's ultimately where we get that authorization, that your accounts are held in trust accounts with specific authorized signatories of Proline. And so this eliminates the need for strata councils to actually worry about signing checks. So we have a full section on those details within the Strata Council Manual if you're interested in more detail around that, those authorizations. Next, I'm going to jump into collection procedures. So we've talked about the income, we've talked about the expenses, but what happens when owners who are responsible to pay their strata fees at the 1st of every month don't? The council manual outlines this really thoroughly, and if you have eagle eyes, you might be able to read the flow chart on your screen. However, it is in the Strata Council Manual, so you can go back and review it. But it basically outlines the process that Proline follows in order to ensure that each strata corporation's arrears are being handled appropriately. And so the process is, and I'll maybe not go into as much detail as the flow chart, but essentially we review each Strata Corporation's arrears reports mid-month, every month, and we decide, depending on what payments have not been made, to either send a reminder letter, a demand letter, or refer that owner to our external lawyer, Mary Morell, to further attempt to collect the strata fees. And so typically speaking, a reminder is sent when an owner hasn't paid strata fees after 30 days. A demand would be sent after 60 days. And then following that, if an owner is 90 days in arrears, then we would be coming to the Strata Council to have a discussion on whether or not we want to go to that step of referring that owner to the lawyer for collection. It is important to know that when we do refer an owner to Mary Morell's office for collection, the legal fees are borne by the owner in arrears. So the Strata Corporation is not responsible for and does not pay any legal fees in order to allow for that collection process to proceed. And so what Mary Morell's office will do is send out basically a demand with the amount that is due along with the legal fees. That owner is obligated to pay directly to her office. And if she doesn't pay within the specified time of her correspondence, she then proceeds with filing a lien against the strata lot to ensure that in the event the strata lot sells, the Strata Corporation is protected against those arrears. Okay. As I said, that flow chart is fairly small on the screen. This particular banking arrangements form is also relatively small, but the great thing and the reason we're here today is to talk about the manual. Those documents are on the manual, are within the manual. I just want to briefly remind everyone that Proline's banking arrangements are with the Bank of Montreal. The cost is $25 per month for each Strata Corporation, and that provides for an operating account. It provides for a contingency reserve fund account. It provides for special levy accounts as required. And it's also important to note that the $25 fee per month provides unlimited pre-authorized debits and checks and unlimited transfers to and from accounts. So this is particularly important when we look at a disbursement report and realize just how many invoices we're paying on behalf of a Strata Corporation every single month. It's also important on this sheet to review the contingency reserve fund and special levy account interest rates. And so those are clearly identified on the helpful page in the Strata Council Manual. It's great because, as I mentioned before, the interest rates tied to those accounts are tied to the prime rate. And so as prime rate increases, so does the interest that you collect in these accounts. I'm going to pass it back to Sherry. That was a lot to go over in terms of numbers, and I'm sure I've bored everyone. So we'll get into emergencies, which tends to be a little bit more exciting.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, that was a lot of accounting stuff, but it's important, as are dealing with emergencies. And as much as accounting is stressful, emergencies is one of the stressful things you may encounter as a council member when dealing with an emergency situation. The situation would be outside of the normal runnings of your Strata Corporation, and it's important to understand whether the issue that has arisen is in fact an emergency or not, and to know how to deal with it easily and effectively when you encounter a emergency situation. And I believe we have a quiz here that Catherine's going to put up on the screen that will help us understand what exactly constitutes an emergency. There are several situations that owners encounter that may or may not be an emergency. And we want to see how many of you out there, not everyone is always in the same opinion when it comes to what is an emergency. could be different for every owner. So it's important that the council be able to recognize what is an emergency after hours that needs to be addressed promptly. Great. So I think everyone can agree there with 97% saying there's smoke coming from under my neighbor's door. That would definitely be an emergency. But it is important to note that in that case, you would not call Proline, you would call the fire department right away. If there is in fact a fire, we want the fire department on scene first, and then afterwards you can call Proline in there if it's after hours, the after hours emergency line. An emergency is always something that needs to be dealt with right away. And what, from a property manager's perspective, we look at, is it a fire or a fire alarm issue? Is it a flood? Is there water involved? Which again, one of the questions was, there's water coming out of my ceiling. 97% of you said, yes, that is an emergency. So definitely water coming out of the ceiling or a sewer backup or a leak is definitely an emergency. Something such as a security issue, a malfunctioning parquet door, or the front door, the main door of the building isn't closing properly. It creates a security issue. That would be an emergency. Elevator issues such as failure or entrapment is an emergency. And electrical issues, including not being able to access the interior of a strata lot, would also constitute an emergency. So we want to make sure that people understand what is the emergency and who do they call. In most emergency situations, the on-call manager would be able to assist you. If it's not an emergency, we do often receive calls that are not emergency calls, and we do our best on the phone to explain to the caller either why we cannot assist them during that time. It's maybe something that has to be dealt with during our office hours, or why they need to put something in writing and send it in an email to their strata manager. So we try and be patient when dealing with those types of calls as well. Proline does have a property manager on call 24/7 during the week from Monday to Friday from 9:30 to 4:30. Our office will take calls. Outside of those times, we have a call that will go through to the on-call manager, and that person will be responsible for taking the call and dealing with whatever the emergency is outside of those normal business hours. And our managers rotate through, usually on a weekly basis, someone will be on call. So whatever the reason is, if you happen to have an emergency, you would have the opportunity to call our office and end up speaking with one of the on-call property managers, and they will do their best to assist you with the situation. If for some reason you get a voicemail, please, you would leave your name, number, your strata address, and the reason for the call, and they typically would call you back within 10 minutes. That's our expected time. So hopefully, unless they're dealing with another emergency, they can get back to you quite promptly. And when you do speak with that on-call manager, they are typically equipped to access your profile sheet, which should contain all your emergency procedures, trade information for your strata, any contact information for those emergency service providers. So for example, if it's a leak you're encountering, who do you typically use for restoration services? That information is all at the fingertips of the on-call manager, and they will Usually they will call a council member. If it's been an owner that's called in the emergency, they will want to get in touch with the council member to let them know what's going on and whether or not there's a council member on site that can either meet with a trade if necessary. So for example, if there's something with the fire alarm panel that's going off and it's 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning and it is a signal that needs to be addressed right away, we would send them out and hopefully connect them with an on-site council member to provide access to the building, and they can address the issue at that time. If for some reason there was no council member on site, the on-call manager would be able to drive to the Proline office and pick up keys for the building and meet that tradesperson either at the at Proline office, or they would go directly to your building site to ensure that they could access the building and deal with the emergency that was going on at the time. And that's important to note that when you are first elected to council, one of the discussions your manager will have with you is the expectation of being on call and who's going to be called first. Usually we'll start with the president, vice president, and we'll go through the list until we are able to make contact with a council member in the building to deal with the emergency. I'm watching the time here, so I'm going to speed through it a little bit quickly. All of this is available in the council manual, and for follow-up on an emergency, your strata manager would receive a report from the on-call manager, and if necessary, they would follow up the following day and take any further actions necessary. So I'm going to move us through a little quickly. Catherine, thank you. In the event that your emergency created the need to file an insurance claim with your insurance provider, we would then contact the insurance company on your behalf if the council wished to do so, and we would start the process of an insurance claim. And if it were a common area issue, so if it was a pipe that was a common pipe that had burst and caused enough damage that it warranted making a claim on your insurance, and that is dependent on the amount of your deductible, which varies from strata to strata. The deductible would be paid usually as an emergency expense from your contingency fund. If it were an owner who had let their bathtub overflow and it had caused water to go down 3 or 4, 5 floors, and again, the damage was such that there would need to be an insurance claim, then that deductible based on your strata bylaws would often be charged back to the unit owner. And again, bylaws play a key role in determining how that works. And in the Strata Council Manual is a component on how your bylaws work. And you should become familiar with that as well. Okay, and I'm noticing that we're at 5 to 1. So we've got here an insurance flow chart, which helps to determine from the start which direction you go. So if it was an owner, what was damaged? Was it a strata lot? Was it common property? And this will guide you through. And Catherine's going to include this with some of the information that we've sent out today so that you can use it as a reference when you are faced with an insurance issue. And hopefully that doesn't happen. And then finally is the timeline. So again, if you are faced with an insurance claim and we've contacted your insurance company, they would assign an adjuster who would then look out at the damage, and we would then need to determine what repairs were necessary. And usually there would be some quotes that would be provided to the insurance adjuster, and then you would select the repair company to come in and do the repair. All of that is very time consuming, and this timeline gives a very rough estimate. It can certainly be faster, but in most cases it tends to draw out, and especially in the case where owners are displaced from their units, it can be a long time before all of those pieces come together and the owners are back in their unit. So mostly it's about being patient and understanding the process, but this insurance timeline does help provide an overview of what you can expect. And at least, you know, it's better than not having any information at all. And that can be conveyed to the owners affected as well. And that helps them have a certain degree of patience as they go through the steps, because it is a process, and it's never a pleasant one when an insurance claim is involved. So, okay. And things we didn't cover today. So we didn't hit the section on bylaws, the depreciation report, maintenance, and Strata websites. All of that is contained within the manual, and we are going to be having a session on bylaws coming up. So if you found today's session helpful, then we invite you to join the next session. And I think now we've got an opportunity to have some questions. So I think Catherine's going to look after that.
There is one question that I'm
Okay.
gonna pull right off the bat. So thank you, Pauline. Pauline asked if we could explain why Proline uses cash-based accounting as opposed to accrual accounting. And there is a very specific reason, and it's because we find that the majority of owners that we work with are able to understand cash-based accounting far easier than they are able to understand accrual-based accounting. And so our operating statements and the way that they're laid out are very similar to the way that normal folks manage their own money. You have a checking account and a savings account, and when you spend that money, it is reflected, and when you deposit money, it's reflected at that time. So that's ultimately how we have always done our property management accounting. And it's just simply to allow for the most people to understand in the easiest way. There's a question about where can I see the manual? So the manual lives on your Strata Corporation Strata Press website under the council only folder.
It's also available through your Strata manager as well. So if your Strata doesn't have a website, you can send an email to your property manager and they can send you a PDF version of the manual.
Great point. Thanks, Sherry. Okay, I don't think there are any other questions, which means that we might be able to end right on time unless anyone has any burning, exciting questions to pose for us before we wish everyone a great afternoon.
It was a lot of information to absorb in a very short time, so we really appreciate everyone attending and listening. And again, if you have questions, please reach out to us. Catherine can always direct your questions accordingly. And your Strata manager, your property manager is always happy to answer any questions you might have as well.
There is a question before we wrap up. Within the budget information, are payables included? And I'm not sure exactly what Alan means by payables, but the operating statement will reflect all of the costs out of each account, but it typically does not include arrears, if that's where you were going with that, Alan. So if you should be reviewing arrears at each Strata Council meeting. However, if you're not, follow up with your Strata property manager and they can easily send you a report.
All right. Okay, I think we'll turn it back to Catherine then. And thank you everyone again.
Oh, exciting. Well, thank you. Yes, that's the summary. Thank you again so much for participating. We really appreciate it. I will be sending out an email to everyone who was signed up for this. And I'll attach the documents that were noted throughout. And if you have anything in particular, you can always respond to that with a question and I can send it to the right person, or you can follow up with your property manager. So thank you again, really appreciate it. And we will see you in a couple months.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.